Five Nights at Freddy's is a massive franchise, with many video games released and in development, novels, movies in production, and even theme parks. Being such a large, multi-million-dollar saga, it's normal for many debates to exist both inside and outside its community. But one of the most striking and strangely common ones I always see in my comments is, when should the story have ended? Most of you might not know my opinion regarding this never-ending debate, and that's why, to please and feed the insatiable algorithm of this platform, I'll leave it for the very end. However, if you're curious and watch my videos, you might already know the answer in advance. At what specific moment should Scott Cawthon have hung up his boots and said, "That's enough, no more FNAF"? Well, in today's video, we are going to review all the endings the saga had, which people claim should have been the ideal ending for the franchise. We will look at a summary of why they believe it should have been that way. This video is an endless debate in which you yourself can collaborate by commenting your opinion. But before doing so, I recommend you subscribe, like the video, and hit the bell so you get notified every time I upload a new, somewhat controversial video like this one. Without further ado, let's get started, once and for all. Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Let's start with the most obvious and surely most popular answer. Five Nights at Freddy's 3. A vast majority of veteran fans as old as I am often argue in debates that the FNAF franchise should have ended and had a perfect closure with this third installment. Superficially speaking, it sounds like a terrible idea considering all the wonderful and not so wonderful things we saw later. But objectively speaking, it doesn't sound like such a far-fetched good ending. To give us an idea, this ending encompasses everything lived and experienced from FNAF 1 to FNAF 3. Three games that tell a story diametrically different from the one we have today, but which clearly were created to tell a single story. And taking that into account, there are many other criteria within the franchise that, in one way or another, would never have been explored or fully known. If Scott Cawthon had ended the franchise in the third game, there would be no background for the story, although truthfully the saga wouldn't have changed much. Since it was thanks to the first three games that the story had a solid base to guide itself, had it ended in the third game, there definitely wouldn't be much background in any area. There was never a detailed explanation of paranormal phenomena, there were no names for the vast majority of characters, and we didn't even deeply know William's true intentions and motives for committing his crimes. We didn't know the identity of the souls, what Remnant was, what Eleanor or Agony were either. Basically, a large part of the FNAF lore took place long after this, and without these elements, everything would be a jumble of community-made theories without much sense. We wouldn't know who the purple guy is. I leave this to your judgment. If FNAF had ended in its third installment, surely the most popular theory would be that the man from the novels is Springtrap himself. But, since the novels themselves are not canon, we wouldn't know his true name either, and likely because the community originally baptized him as Vincent, Scott probably would have adopted that name. It already happened several times in the saga, like with Golden Freddy's name originally being Yellow Bear, or the name of the withered animatronics, who were named by the community. And among these, many other things would have happened. But definitely, the saga would be much more incomplete, full of many still open doubts, questions that would never be answered, and of course, a feeling that although it ended with a solid story, something perhaps a bit more interesting to explore was missing. That said, had it ended in FNAF 3, surely the same story would be more focused on the paranormal, and not so much on science fiction as it is currently. That would be in another alternative timeline, because after the third one, we had Five Nights at Freddy's 4. FNAF 4 is another one of those big contenders for why the franchise should have ended right there. Mainly due to the fact that the game was supposed to narrate who was responsible for the bite of 87 and would answer a few other questions we didn't know until then. In fact, the game itself was previously promoted as the final chapter, alluding to the fact that there would be no more Five Nights at Freddy's, and that this would serve as the first chronological point in the story to understand everything. All of this started thanks to the heavy criticism FNAF 3 received at the time. Since many people saw it as a game that wasn't really scary, with poor mechanics, poorly worked jump scares, and in general, a rather bitter taste for fans who were expecting a grand finale. And that's where FNAF 4 made its appearance. With much more terrifying nightmare designs, and a mechanic that definitely gave more than one person a good scare. However, with the introduction of the bite of 1983 and many other narrative inconsistencies throughout the gameplay, FNAF 4 had to postpone being the ending of the franchise to keep moving forward and stretch as much as possible. And if we add to that the fact that, after the release of FNAF 4, Scott Cawthon came up with a brilliant idea of launching a quite colorful and cute-themed RPG spin-off that held strange connections to the story, then you have the perfect formula for the franchise to die. In fact, it was thanks to a harsh review of FNAF 4 by PewDiePie, and the harsh criticism FNAF World received at the time from the public, that Scott had enough will to get up and work once more on another game that would break all expectations. Thus, Sister Location was born, and later on, FNAF 6. But let's not get ahead of ourselves yet. One of the most major things that we would never have gotten an answer for is knowing what the nightmares are. If we take FNAF 4 as the ending, the most obvious answer is that these are simply nightmares of a dying child, victim of an accident. However, thanks to Sister Location and other games that came out later, people began to theorize quite a bit about their true existence. Some even pointing out that they were products of artifacts seen in the books like illusion discs. However, officially we now know that the nightmares actually do exist, and that they are real thanks to a dangerous gas that William Afton used for experimenting. In fact, another important point is that perhaps, had the story ended here, we would never have discovered another super important thing. Remnant is a supernatural element of FNAF. Basically, it is the result of heating metal and metallic parts of an animatronic that is possessed to then be injected into a human being so they can regenerate parts, or failing that, be immortal. This concept was introduced in the books, but thanks to Sister Location, it became completely canon and began to gain super important relevance. Since that's how we finally found out and understood why William did everything he did. He stopped being simply a deranged criminal and started becoming a mad scientist genius who wanted to achieve immortality and succeeded. Had the story of FNAF not continued from where we had it with the fourth game, surely this facet of William would never have been explored, and the whole topic of the experiments would have remained an unused idea. And it's sad, as it is what personally, in a curious way, makes the theme of the animatronics more interesting. It gives a sensible explanation for why they can be possessed and introduces other concepts or supernatural forces into the FNAF universe. The entire Afton family plot and remnant. This is the most important point and the reason why basically the entire plot began to revolve after FNAF 4. Basically, Scott Cawthon, seeing all the confusion caused by this game, decided to release another one with many connections to the fourth installment. In FNAF Sister Location, we literally see cameras and a complex map showing the blueprints of the Afton house. Had the saga ended at Five Nights at Freddy's 4, many doubts and important things would have been left out, such as the toxic gases used by William to create the nightmares, the entire story of Elizabeth Afton, Michael Afton, and the crying child, William's apparent family and wife, his connections with other characters like Henry, the existence of the Funtime animatronics, and among these, many more details that made this part of the saga the Afton era, would have simply disappeared. Completely. Crying Child wouldn't exist. Crying Child is an interesting character. Not only because he only served as an object to be used in the minigame, but because to this day, we don't even have an official name for him. Regardless, if the story had ended in FNAF 4, we wouldn't know about his origin, much less his relationship with Michael, since Michael wouldn't exist. In general, a large part of the story of Five Nights at Freddy's had the first trio of video games as its point of origin. But since Five Nights at Freddy's 4, we have the certainty that certain new concepts finished redefining the franchise as such. And if it had ended in this game, there would definitely be more questions than answers. I don't think it would have been a genuine point for the saga to end, but it also would have ended all traces of science fiction, and we would have had an ending full of questions that could have been answered in some comic series or book of the saga. Anyway, the truth is that this is very much up to your criteria, but there is still one more candidate to review. Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator and Ultimate Custom Night. Now, This was supposed to be the canonical and original ending of the entire franchise. While Five Nights at Freddy's 3 and FNAF 4 had the opportunity within Scott's mind to be the endings of the saga, FNAF 6 was intended from the start to be that great conclusive closure to its story and narrative. Although deep down, we all knew that the magic wasn't going to end so easily. That's how in December 2017, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator would come out with the hope of giving a narrative closure to the entire franchise. It would take the original animatronics from FNAF 1 and 2, William Afton and Springtrap from FNAF 3, the puppet trapped in an animatronic, and finally Circus Baby, William's daughter and the main antagonist of Sister Location. All these elements together, added to Henry, Michael, and the total closure after the fire of the last Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, implied that this game would be, in theory, the last important piece of the story, with an ending where souls would finally rest in peace and be free from all torment. But we all know now that it can't end that easily. We wouldn't know Henry. A key and important piece for the story of FNAF is William Afton's own partner. Although this character first appeared within the aforementioned novel saga, it wouldn't be until FNAF 6 that he had a much more relevant participation, fitting all the pieces as William's former partner, both being founders of Fazbear Entertainment. None of this would exist. The saga wouldn't have expanded so much. And I think the most obvious point behind this is that the franchise would never have expanded so much if it weren't for FNAF 6 and Ultimate Custom Night. Yes, we all saw how FNAF could end, but thanks to Scott's decision to continue with the story, we had other much more interesting and striking bets. From a virtual reality game, an augmented reality one, 2 huge completely free roam games, collaborations with other games, and even a movie trilogy. All through the financing of these projects, which allowed FNAF to even have parks, official merchandise, and even ports for different platforms. I believe Scott's ambition to expand his franchise was good, and it's what allowed us to enjoy all the good things we saw and will see in the future. In conclusion, the 3 great alternatives for FNAF endings definitely give us a lot to talk about. All are potentially good, but I really have an opinion. And if you were paying attention throughout the video, I think you'll know what it is. And yes, I believe none of them were a good ending for the saga. Yes, the FNAF 6 one was the most dignified, but it still left quite a few things open, and being emotional didn't technically make it the best. Honestly, I think what we saw afterward and the great opportunities for a resurgence that FNAF had after falling multiple times throughout its history were very much worth it. But this is my opinion. Where do you think FNAF should have ended? I'll be reading you down in the comments. I'm Prophecyx, and with nothing more to say, I'll see you next time.